Hey guys, tonight we slip into the foggy streets of Victorian London where the air smells like coal smoke and the horses never really stop clattering. You're wrapped in a threadbare coat, one pocket torn, the other holding a crumbling biscuit you found somewhere near Clerkenwell. The gas lamps flicker above, their dull halos casting just enough light to keep you from stepping into horse dung or worse. Somewhere nearby, a woman is shouting about eels, and someone else is quietly coughing like they mean it. This isn't a city that sleeps, not really, not all at once, anyway. The rich have pillows, the poor have corners, and the rest of us, we drift somewhere in between, awake when we shouldn't be, tired when we can't afford to be. And fair warning, if you were hoping for a full night's rest here, you probably won't survive this timeline. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from tonight and what time your local midnight ghosts usually clock in. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle your feet down a cobblestone lane, ducking the edge of a dripping awning, ears tuned for the soft jingle of a night soil cart or the slower click of a constable's boots. It's sometime after midnight, though the exact hour is anyone's guess unless you've got a church bell handy or one of those fancier candle clocks if you're truly posh. Victorian London is oddly alive at this hour. Bakers are kneading the first loaves. Milkmen are just beginning their routes, clinking bottles in sleepy rhythm. And chimney sweeps, yes, even the tiny ones are already up, already covered in soot, already working. You pass one now. He can't be more than 7. He's got a rope tied around his waist and the dead-eyed stare of someone who's learned to avoid looking up at chimneys unless he absolutely has to. His master follows behind, a wiry man with one glove and a faint whistle that sounds cheerful until you notice the cane. This city eats sleep for supper. Unless you have the luxury of locking your door and drawing your curtain, you get used to grabbing moments where you can on benches, between shifts, under stairwells. And even the wealthier folks don't exactly rest like we do now. They're often up in the night too, though they'll tell you it's for spiritual contemplation, not indigestion or existential dread. Sure, there's this curious phenomenon historians call segmented sleep. Basically, people back then often went to bed after sunset, slept for a few hours, woke up around midnight, pottered about for an hour or two, then fell back asleep until dawn. It was normal, expected. They'd pray, read, visit neighbors, or just lie there and think, honestly, it's the perfect excuse for that 2 a.m. snack you pretend not to have. But back to the street. A horse-drawn cart rolls by slowly, its driver half dozing on the bench, reins draped loosely in his hands. He nods to you. That counts as a full conversation at this hour. Historians still argue whether this sleepy rhythm was a natural biological response to darkness or just a result of boredom and lack of better options. Some even think it might have been healthier, like your brain needed that little midnight intermission, a sort of emotional stretch break. Or maybe people were just chronically exhausted, and their brains had to invent new ways to survive it. You step aside for a woman carrying a lantern and a basket of fish heads. She's not a character in a Dickens novel. She's just trying to get ready for market. Her feet slap on the wet stone, and she's humming under her breath, something old and wordless. A cat watches from a doorway. Cats do very well in this part of the city. No curfews, endless rats. A whole alleyway can be ruled by a single bold tabby with half an ear. You, meanwhile, are starting to feel the lull. Not sleepiness exactly, but that liminal stage where the city begins to hush just enough for your breath to match its pace. It's not quiet. There's always the low hum of something boiling, breaking, or breathing, but there's a rhythm. A sort of background lullaby made of distant clinks, carriage wheels, and the occasional oi. It's in this hour that you start to notice the ones who never stopped working. Nighttime in Victorian London was a tapestry of invisible labor. Newspaper boys folding headlines by gaslight, seamstresses finishing orders by candle stub, matchgirls blowing on splinters to spark the next batch, and nightmen, those poor souls in charge of emptying chamber pots, dragging their carts along the alleyways with the dignity of the damned. One fringe story floats into memory, a rumor that some Londoners believed too much sleep was dangerous, that it made you sluggish, vulnerable to bad humors, or worse, melancholy. So the working poor didn't just lack sleep. They sometimes feared it, as if rest were a luxury so foreign it became suspicious. Some scholars insist this is more legend than fact, pointing out that nearly everyone complains about not getting enough sleep, no matter the era. But the line between fear and necessity gets blurry when your next meal depends on your eyes staying open. You turn a corner and find a rare oasis, a coffee stall, still open, its brazier glowing like a sleepy star. A man in a scarf nods and hands you a tin cup, strong, bitter, a bit burnt. It jolts you upright just enough to notice the sky beginning to pale in the east. One more sweep of the brush, one more yawn behind the baker's door, one more wink from the lamplighter unhooking his pole, and the night slides, quietly, into memory. You slip down an alley just as the first bells begin to chime in the distance. St. Paul's, maybe, or some minor church with a very determined sexton. Either way, it's the city's polite way of announcing, well, the sun's technically coming up, so we might as well get moving. Not that everyone was sleeping. We've already met our soot-smeared friends, the chimney sweeps. But tonight, you're following one of their competitors in the art of nocturnal endurance, the night watchman. He's not quite a police officer, not quite a doorman, but somewhere in between, armed with a lantern and a rattle, and likely about as effective in a brawl as a wet dishcloth. You hear the rattle before you see him. It's more wooden click than siren, a polite way of saying, don't steal anything, please. His cloak sways around his ankles, and he looks as bored as anyone who's had to walk in slow circles for 8 hours should be. The Victorian night watchman was meant to be a symbol of order, that warm, flickering bit of human presence amid the chaos. He'd patrol the streets, call out the hour, and report if anything caught fire, exploded, or started screaming. The job required no formal training, just a sturdy coat and the ability to stay awake, which, let's be honest, wasn't a guarantee. In fact, one of the more whispered complaints about the watchmen was how often they were found napping in doorways, snoring away their wages while pickpockets skipped by. But technically, they were the city's defenders. If you got robbed at 3:14 a.m., this was the man you'd shout at through a foggy window. Of course, shouting required energy, and energy required food, which brings us to the secret economy of night food vendors. Yes, those brave souls who cooked eels or hot pies on little braziers and wandered the streets like ghostly food trucks. They kept everyone going, sweep boys, watchmen, factory girls getting off the late shift. If you smelled stewed meat wafting through the alleys after midnight, chances are it wasn't your imagination or a haunting. It was someone's dinner probably being eaten with fingers. You catch a whiff of roast chestnuts now, sold by a woman who's got 3 teeth, 2 baskets, and 1 very sharp elbow. Her fire is tiny, her prices are suspiciously low, and her story's even cheaper. You hand her a coin, no idea of the value. You just like her apron, and she hands you a hot bundle wrapped in paper that once held shipping news. Victorians didn't just eat at odd hours, they had to. The working poor especially lived in shifts. If you worked in a printing house, you might start at 11 p.m. and finish at sunrise. If you scrubbed floors in a rich household, your day might start before dawn and last until the lady of the house stopped inventing errands. So food happened whenever it could, often standing up, often cold, always rushed. One oddity, the milk supper. For those who could afford it, there was a peculiar belief that warm milk helped induce sleep. Entire generations were raised on warm milk and biscuit before bed, and some wealthier Victorians had servants wake them to prepare it during their segmented sleep breaks. Because obviously, nothing says restful slumber like demanding food service at 2:11 a.m. Historians still argue whether this Victorian obsession with digestive bedtime rituals was about actual health or just a class performance. You weren't really upper class unless you made someone else get up at night so you could fall back asleep. Back on the street, your feet begin to ache, not painfully. Just that dull kind of tired that starts in your arches and works its way up to your shoulders. Welcome to stand fatigue, a common complaint in Victorian medical books. The human body was apparently never designed to stand for 14 hours straight on cobbles. Who knew? You duck inside a passageway where a group of night workers are clustered around a candle stub. Two are basket makers, their fingers moving so fast you think they might be dreaming with their eyes open. One is a girl who sharpens scissors, yes, just scissors. Apparently there was a whole profession for that. She hums while she works. Something slightly off-key but comforting. And here's the strange thing, no one seems particularly angry about being awake. Tired, yes. Cold, often. But for many Victorians, the night was a fact of life. The same way a river doesn't care if you're wet. The city didn't care if you were tired. You just adapted, or broke. There's even a soft culture of kindness hidden here. Workers share tips, warm each other's hands, keep half an eye open for constables or worse. You get the sense that these half-lit friendships are part of what made survival possible. Of course, not everyone was so lucky. So, some jobs didn't just keep you up, they worked you until you collapsed. Coal heavers, rag pickers, women known as searchers who were paid to find the dead and report them to parishes. Yes, someone had to check if your neighbor was still breathing, especially in winters when families ran out of coal and hope simultaneously. One fringe case recorded by a local doctor told of a man who claimed he hadn't slept in 5 days, not from insomnia, but from taking on 4 jobs to pay for his wife's medicine. Whether this was entirely true or the Victorian version of a humble brag is unclear, but it stuck around as a story passed between night workers as proof of grit, or perhaps madness. You walk on. A fox darts past you, almost casual in its trot. London's always had foxes. Back then, they were a nuisance. Now, they're practically employees of the city council. The sky begins to lighten, not dramatically, but just enough to turn the black outlines of chimneys into silhouettes. Someone nearby is whistling. A boy with a bundle of newspapers brushes past, shouting headlines that make no sense until your brain catches up. Time has no fixed meaning at night. You're not quite sure if this is the end of a day or the beginning of another. But the city seems to know what it's doing, so you follow its rhythm. And right before dawn, you see her, a woman, bundled in layers, sweeping the steps of a tea shop. She pauses, catches your eye, and smiles not kindly, not unkindly. Just a nod that says, "You're still here. Me too." And for one fleeting moment, the city seems to breathe. You linger in the faint blue hour before the sun fully claims the rooftops. Just long enough to realize something peculiar most of Victorian London's night workers never quite got off the clock. Sleep wasn't a right. It was a luxury rationed out like stale bread. And if you were a child, well, forget it. Your job was to stay awake when the adults couldn't. Let's follow one of them now. He's about 10 or maybe 12. Hard to tell under all the grime and oversized clothes. His name's probably something like Alfie or Ned, though half the city just calls boys like him boy. He's been up since yesterday, possibly the day before that, with a metal tray of matches strapped to his chest like a bandolier of pitiful hopes. He's what's known as a match seller, and if he doesn't sell enough, he doesn't eat. It's not a metaphor, it's just Tuesday. Child labor was woven into every Victorian city like mold into bread pudding. Not just chimney sweeps, though, yes. Those blackened little acrobats get the press, but factory boys, crossing sweepers, street musicians, and one unfortunate subcategory known as pure finders. These were kids and adults who collected dog poo, pure to sell to tanneries for softening leather. Because if you thought your job stinks now, imagine being paid by the sack of poop. You tail little Alfie as he navigates horse droppings, splashes from chamber pots dumped out of windows, and the sort of mud that somehow crunches and squelches at the same time. He hasn't slept in at least a full day, but there's no time to think about it. A constable might chase him off, or another kid might swipe his matches. Victorian urban life had no recess. Historians still argue whether these children actually understood how sleep-deprived they were. One school of thought says they simply normalized it when everyone you know is bone-weary. It just seems like being alive. Another view suggests their tiny, overworked bodies developed a kind of emotional numbness, the psychological equivalent of putting your brain in rice. Either way, the results were not charming. By mid-century, medical journals began documenting industrial fatigue in children, symptoms like shaking hands, swollen joints, and something called drooping mind, which sounds poetic until you remember it basically meant being too tired to think. One doctor described a child who fell asleep mid-step and face-planted into a bread cart. Another wrote about children who twitched in their sleep like dogs, reliving the rhythms of machinery. You cross through a working-class neighborhood, now rows of low houses packed tighter than teeth, some with curtains, most without. A few flickers of candlelight still peek from the cracks, proof that somebody's still up, scrubbing laundry or preparing a baby's bottle over a single coal ember. Inside one of these homes, an entire family is folded like laundry into one room, mom and dad on the bed, 3 kids under it, and Gran curled up in a chair like an angry cat. It's not tragic to them. It's just the floor plan. If someone gets up for the privy, everyone wakes. If a baby cries, it's a group project. The idea of personal sleep doesn't exist. You sleep when you're not doing something more urgent, like breathing. You sit down next to the hearth. It's cold, and someone's old boot is serving as a kind of sock warmer. A girl not much older than Alfie opens her eyes and looks at you. She yawns, wipes her nose on her sleeve, and turns over. That's bedtime. No lullabies, no pillow mist spray, just whatever moment you could grab. Oddly, despite these cramped and chaotic spaces, Victorian families were obsessed with moral sleep. Books for children warned against sloth, excessive napping, and impure dreams. There was even a genre of nighttime devotional guides, like Sacred Slumbers or Wholesome Sleep for the Christian Child, that insisted one's final thoughts before unconsciousness should be of angels, not pudding. Of course, the streets told a different story. You return to the alley where Alfie's day is just now ending. He's sold maybe half his matches, not enough. He's crouched behind a coal bin, trying to finish the last cold bit of pie he nicked from somewhere. His eyelids droop, but he doesn't lie down. You never lie down outside. That's how you get stepped on. Or worse. Here comes a fascinating fringe detail. Some children, especially chimney boys, were said to sleep upright, with their backs against walls and hands curled into the folds of their shirts to keep warm. One missionary noted that he found boys snoring on stoops, like cats, but too light to stir when prodded. There's even a recorded case of a child who slept standing up, wedged between 2 crates. It's bleak, and yet some kids found joy, or at least dark humor. They gave nicknames to the most brutal overseers. They swapped horror stories like bedtime fairy tales. One group of mudlarks even started a betting game based on who could stay awake the longest while sorting river rubbish. The prize, a single boiled sweet and the right to boss the others around until your next shift. What's remarkable is how common this was. In 1851, the British census tried to count how many children were employed in urban centers, and the results were so bad they almost buried the report. The Victorian Parliament went back and forth, passing various factory acts that technically restricted child labor, but the enforcement was more theoretical than real. You could say we cared deeply on paper. But if a chimney needs sweeping and there's a 6-year-old nearby, guess who's getting soot in their ear? But here's your mainstream fact. The Chimney Sweepers Regulation Act of 1864 finally banned master sweeps from employing children under 10. Progress. Though, like many Victorian reforms, it relied on the honor system, which was about as effective as stapling a no-lying sign to a politician. You pass by a newspaper kiosk now. Its vendor is asleep, chin on chest, snoring gently behind the latest broadsides declaring victories in faraway wars and scandals involving ladies with suspiciously modern hobbies. The city stirs. Somewhere, A milkman is yawning through his route. A factory gate creaks open, and workers start to file in, blinking like moles emerging from burrows. But you're staying with the ones who haven't yet slept. And Alfie, for now, is one of them. He curls tighter, shivers, and tucks his tray of unsold matches beneath his chin. It's not a bed, but it'll do. The lamplighter's shift is nearly over, his pole resting for a moment on his shoulder as the last gas lantern flickers into silence. But you're still awake. Or maybe more accurately, they are. The invisible army of Victorian night dwellers, porters, brewers, grave diggers, bread bakers, those who quietly kept the city running while most folks snored into straw pillows or threadbare quilts, and among them, the most paradoxical profession of the night watchman. You duck into a narrow alley where a figure leans against a crooked brick wall, lantern swaying gently from his hook. He's not a constable. Not really. He's a little too round, a little too sleepy, and a little too poorly paid for proper law enforcement. His job is to walk a set route, shake a rattle if he sees a fire or suspicious activity, and most importantly, not fall asleep. You can guess how well that goes. It's a quiet stretch of London near the Thames, where fog hugs the cobbles like a damp coat, and you can hear every drip from the eaves. The watchman pulls his cloak tighter, sighs, and mutters something about bloody cold for a Wednesday. You walk beside him, matching his pace. Every few steps, he thwacks his cane on the stones, not to scare off criminals, just to stay awake. Night watchmen were supposed to be the guardians of the sleeping city, but in practice, they were often the sleepiest people in it. Historians still argue whether these men served any real purpose or were just a symbolic comfort to nervous Victorians afraid of being burgled mid-dream. Some accounts describe watchmen as comically ineffective napping in alleys, bribed with a pint, or so deaf they didn't hear a cartload of stolen furniture rumble by. Yet the job persisted. Why? Because cities needed somebody awake at night, even if only to bear witness to the quiet chaos of those dark hours. You veer off his patrol route into a bakery where the day begins just as night falls elsewhere. A young woman named Clara is elbow-deep in dough, sleeves rolled up, curls tied back, and eyes half shut. She's been here since 2 a.m., and her first loaves must be ready by dawn. Flour dust dances like pollen in the air. The room smells like rising yeast and warm milk. Victorian bakers were notorious for their odd sleep schedules. Most worked what we'd call a divided sleep a few hours at dusk, then back up well before midnight to knead, stoke the ovens, and start the daily ritual of transforming raw grain into sustenance. The town's rhythm depended on them, but it wasn't glamorous. A 19th century report described bakers as pale, stooping men with red eyes and twitching hands. Clara isn't stooping yet, but you can see the fatigue in her fingers, pressing and folding, pressing and folding. She hums a tune between yawns. She says it keeps the loaves from rising crooked, though it's more likely to keep her mind from drifting too far into the land of Nod. And here's your quirky tidbit: bakers often wore nightcaps not just for warmth, but to stop flour from settling in their hair while they worked. Some even tied handkerchiefs over their faces like sleepy bandits to avoid inhaling too much airborne starch. Health and safety wasn't exactly a Victorian obsession. You glance around her workroom. A cat naps on a sack of barley. A wooden spoon stirs itself in a bowl by some mysterious angle of gravity. Clara drops a loaf into the oven and closes the door with a grunt. You ask how much sleep she gets. She shrugs. Sometimes I blink for an hour, she says. That counts. That does count, apparently. Divided sleep napping at odd hours, squeezing in rest where possible, wasn't just common in the Victorian world. It was normal. In fact, the notion of one long, unbroken night's sleep didn't become the gold standard until the 20th century. Before then, people often had first sleep and second sleep, with an hour or two of wakefulness in between. This was sometimes a quiet time for prayer, for reading, or, if you were lucky, cuddling. But if you were Clara, you were punching dough. Or if you were a servant, scrubbing pans. Or if you were a watchman, whacking your cane against puddles and hoping your bladder held until sunrise. There's a warehouse nearby. Let's poke our nose in. Inside, you find dock workers, men and women, both hauling crates and barrels by candlelight, their shadows thrown large and wobbly on the walls. One man sings, another snores between loads. They work in bursts, then rest wherever they fall. Sleep is a relay race here, not a destination. In Victorian London, night work wasn't confined to factories. The docks, post offices, train yards, hospitals all relied on twilight labor to maintain the illusion of a smooth and functioning daylight world. For every letter delivered at 8 a.m., someone was sorting it at 3. For every body buried at noon, someone dug the grave at midnight. It was a 24-hour ecosystem powered by sheer exhaustion. Scholars still debate how this round-the-clock labor impacted health long-term. Some argue that the chronic fatigue of night work led to early death, malnutrition, and weakened immune systems. Others suggest workers adapted more fluidly than we assume, relying on a patchwork of naps, stimulants, and social bonds to get by. You step back outside. The sky is warming from gray to lavender, and the fog is beginning to break. Clara's loaves are done. The watchman is heading home. He waves to a fishmonger setting up her stall, who waves to a paperboy rubbing sleep from his eyes. And you're beginning to understand that for much of Victorian life, sleep was not a nightly reset. It was a rotating favor, a thing you snuck in corners, between tasks, during prayer, or while leaning against a horse cart. If it came at all, the sun climbs just a little higher, and another sleepless night quietly disappears. You haven't walked far before a new sound joins the morning chorus metal on stone, rhythmic and sharp. Ahead, a figure crouches near the street corner, back hunched, boots dusty, a chimney sweep, not the jolly, top-hatted version from musicals, but the real deal, covered in soot, sleeves rolled up, eyes puffy from another long shift that probably began while the rest of the world was dreaming of softer things. This is Thomas. He's 14, which makes him practically a veteran. His little brother Sam is only 8 and already small for his age. Tonight, Sam had the tougher climb. The secret night jobs of chimney sweeps weren't exactly a secret, but they weren't discussed with much enthusiasm either. Too dirty, too dark, too close to things polite Victorians like to pretend didn't exist: poverty, child labor, and the very real chance of dying in a chimney shaft. Most sweeps started at 3 or 4 a.m., working through dawn to avoid disrupting businesses or waking clients. Plus, no one wanted to smell soot while sipping morning tea. As you follow Thomas down a row of terraced houses, he tells you about their master, a man who feeds them just enough, sleeps while they work, and occasionally hits them with a brush handle if they miss a deadline. Sam doesn't talk much. His face is smeared with soot and sleep in equal measure. Climbing the chimney is the easy part, Thomas explains. It's the in-between bit where the shaft narrows to the width of your rib cage that gets tricky. That's where you don't move unless you exhale. That's where, if you panic, you might get stuck. That's where sleep deprivation becomes something much worse: disorientation. And yes, historians still argue whether the masters genuinely believed this was the best way to train boys, or whether it was just a brutally efficient exploitation of desperation. Some sweeping apprentices died in the chimneys. Some burned. Many developed a form of cancer known only to their trade: soot-wort. There's your cheerful bedtime fact. But here's the strange bit: some chimney sweeps formed strong bonds with one another. They swapped stories on rooftops, shared crusts of bread, and looked out for the younger kids when the master wasn't around. Thomas has a little cloth pouch where he keeps things Sam finds during their climbs: buttons, pins, even a half-melted thimble once. He says it helps Sam sleep to count them. You sit with them as the sun rises. They share a slice of day-old bread, their backs against a brick chimney, still warm from a sleepless hearth below. Sam closes his eyes and leans against his brother's arm. Sleep, in this moment, is not just a luxury, it's an earned truce with the world, from rooftops to cellars. Let's descend now into one of the stranger spaces of the Victorian night, the laundry room. Yes, laundry, specifically the brutal, boiling, back-breaking task of washing clothes and linens by hand. For many women, especially those working in middle-class households, this was a night job, too. Laundry was noisy, messy, and best done when the family wouldn't hear or see it. So you're standing here now, elbows deep in a tin basin of gray water, helping a woman named Elsie scrub out the week's stains. It's 11:45 p.m. She's got until sunrise to finish. Her hands are chapped and red, the skin rubbed raw by lye soap and constant friction. Her eyelids droop. She occasionally mumbles half of a lullaby, likely one she used to hum to her baby. Now grown and working in a factory across town. You're both quiet, save for the slosh of water and creak of the floorboards. Elsie works by candlelight, though the smoke makes her cough. Victorian laundresses often suffered respiratory issues from inhaling fumes, not just from candles, but from bleach, ammonia, and other cleaning agents no one thought twice about. One fringe remedy she tried once, pigeon fat, rubbed on the chest to draw out the fumes. She doesn't recommend it. She pauses, rubbing her temples. She's been up for 19 hours straight. Sleep. She'll get some around 8 a.m. if she finishes early. Her secret trick, she counts to 50 while scrubbing, then flips. Keep the rhythm, keep the mind moving. She says, it's part lullaby, part survival tactic, and it works. For now. You ask why she doesn't nap instead, and she smiles a tired smile. Because I'd never wake up in time, would I? That's the cruel equation of Victorian sleep life if you're poor. Rest becomes a gamble. Too much, and you miss the only job you've got. Too little, and your body starts protesting quietly at first, then louder, but people like Elsie. They find ways. They nap during boiling cycles. They sleep sitting up on wooden stools. They tie their skirts to the leg of the basin, so if they nod off, they're jolted awake. Not comfortable, not dignified, but effective. There's something eerily soothing about the repetition of it. Scrub, ring, flip, scrub, ring, flip. Elsie hums again, and you find yourself swaying slightly. It's a lullaby built of labor. And here's your quirky tidbit: some laundresses would stick pins in their aprons, not for sewing, but to prick themselves when they felt sleep coming on. A tiny jab to keep from drifting into scalding water. It's horrifying. But it worked. Outside, a rooster crows, not charming, just loud. Elsie glances up. She's got one more load. You leave her to it, stepping back into the early morning streets. The city is starting to stir now. Horses clop past, pulling milk carts and coal wagons. A paperboy yawns so wide he nearly drops his bundle. Somewhere behind you, Thomas and Sam are finishing another flue. Elsie wipes her forehead. The world is waking. But for the night workers, the ones you've walked with, sleep is just beginning to peek out from behind the curtains, shy, stubborn, and long overdue. You head down toward the market square, where the stone paths are still damp from the evening drizzle, and the air smells faintly of old apples and damp sacks. The lanterns are being snuffed one by a man in a long coat. It's his job every morning before the sun rises fully. He moves slowly, methodically, a bit like someone operating on muscle memory, which, frankly, he is. This is Martin. He's what the Victorians called a link boy, or at least he used to be. In earlier decades, link boys lit the way for late-night pedestrians with resin-soaked torches. By the time you're walking with Martin, gas lamps have taken over, but someone still needs to put them out before daylight. He's part of the invisible army that maintains the city while it sleeps or before it properly wakes. Think of him as the Victorian night janitor of light. Martin hasn't had a proper night's sleep in years. His hours are skewed like a broken sundial, sleep from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Do odd jobs until dusk, nap again if he's lucky, then out from 2 a.m. to 6 extinguishing lamps, cleaning soot crusts from the glass, trimming the wicks, all by hand. No fancy gloves, no health plan, just him and a long pole with a snuffer on the end. Victorian lighting was notoriously unreliable. Gas leaks weren't uncommon. and there were nights when Martin passed out briefly mid-route, maybe from fumes, maybe just from sheer exhaustion. Historians still argue whether this kind of blackout rest counted as functional sleep or just dangerous napping. You pause beside him as he wrestles with a stubborn lamp that won't quite go out. He grumbles and jokes that some lamps have personalities, like pets with attitudes. You suspect he's not entirely wrong. He tells you about his daughter, who works as a seamstress in a dress shop and also moonlights stitching custom lace collars from home at night. She's saving for a train ticket to somewhere that doesn't smell like fish and fog. You don't ask how much she sleeps. You already know the answer. You offer to carry the snuffer pole, but Martin waves you off. Takes balance, he says, and rhythm, like dancing, but slower, and with far more chance of getting soot in your eyes. As dawn edges over the rooftops, Martin finishes his last lamp. He wipes his hands on his coat and sighs, not the relieved sigh of a job well done, but the weary exhale of someone about to start their real day. He still has deliveries to make. The bread shop wants its crates stacked, and someone's dog has a reputation for escaping unless Martin reinforces the back fence by noon. Sleep. Maybe I'll catch a nap while the bread bakes, he mutters. You wonder if he even lies down or just leans against the wall and closes his eyes. You drift toward the edge of town, where wooden carts creak along muddy lanes, and the rhythm of hoofbeats is hypnotic. Here, another kind of night worker is finishing up one you probably haven't thought about since primary school, the night soil men. No, seriously. In an era before sewer systems, someone had to collect the contents of chamber pots and outdoor privies. These men, often called gong farmers, would start their rounds just before midnight and continue until morning. The smell, let's not get into that. But the hours, awful. The job was so unpleasant that night soil men were paid more than many other manual laborers. Danger money, you might call it. Not just because of the filth, but because of the disease risk, the physical toll, and the small but real chance of falling into a cesspit, which did happen. Tonight, you're following Albert. He's been doing this for 20 years. His sense of smell is long gone. He carries a lantern in one hand and a long-handled scoop in the other. His boots are specially modified steel-tipped, thick-soled, and permanently stained. He wears a scarf soaked in vinegar tied around his face to ward off the worst of the stench. Doesn't really help. Albert talks while he works. It's how he stays awake. Tells you stories about what people throw out with their waist buttons, coins, scraps of cloth. Once he found an entire wedding ring. Never figured out whether it was lost or disposed of with intent. He says the worst part isn't the smell, or the stairs, or even the rats, it's the hours. The way your body forgets how to rest. He sleeps in bursts, 2 hours here, 3 hours there. Never through the night. Not once in 2 decades. His wife used to wait up for him, but now she just leaves tea on the stove, strong enough to corrode a spoon. The night soil trade eventually declined with the rise of sewer systems, and Albert isn't sorry. He's tired all the time, and yet, like so many others, he's still here, still trudging through the night, because someone has to. Your quirky tidbit for this stroll. Some wealthy Victorians believed that placing a bundle of lavender in their chamber pots would somehow cleanse the air and bless the home. Spoiler, it did not. Albert finishes his final bucket, wipes his hands, and sits for a moment on the edge of his cart. You sit beside him. There's a kind of calm in the stillness, the kind you only find at the tail end of an all-night job when the hard part is done. But sleep is still an hour away. He nods off mid-sentence. Just for a moment. You let him. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do in the sad history of sleep is nothing at all. You leave Albert gently snoring on his cart bench, the lantern beside him flickering like it, too, might take a break. Your boots click softly on cobblestones now growing lighter with the hesitant blue of pre-dawn. And in that eerie hour when London pretends to rest yet really doesn't, you stumble on a curious little figure, a boy, no more than 8, maybe 9. He's standing outside a bakehouse with a cloth sack slung over one shoulder, face blotched with flour, and the faintest smudge of coal along his cheek like a painter's signature. You follow him silently as he ducks around the back and slides into a low side door, too small for an adult to enter without crawling. You don't need to ask what he's doing, you already know. This is Sam. And Sam is what's left of the bread trade's invisible labor, the dough turners, oven feeders, and, unofficially, sleepwalkers. He's here to to re-knead. This bakehouse starts preparing dough at midnight so the first batches can hit the streets with sunrise. Someone has to punch it down every few hours, or it gets unruly. Yeast is a needy thing. Sam's job is simple in description punch. Fold, wait, punch, fold, yawn. Repeat until the baker arrives, and the dough is deemed ready for fire. It's easy to assume he's helping out his father or uncle, but no, Sam's parents work down at the tannery. The bakery just pays better, even if it pays in leftover crusts and half a copper. Some nights he doesn't get home until noon, which means yes, you guessed it, he sleeps in odd, patchy windows. 1 hour leaning against the wall, 2 hours under the counter if the floor isn't still warm from the oven. Bread baking might smell cozy and nostalgic to you, but to Sam, it's just heavy labor that never really ends. The heat is constant, the lifting endless, the quiet ironically deafening. Victorian children like Sam often worked more hours than modern adults. Historians still argue whether these night shifts were considered normal or if they were a cultural coping mechanism during industrialization. What's clear is that kids like Sam rarely got through a night or a life without a few permanent scars, emotional or otherwise. You glance over as he hauls a 10-pound bowl of dough onto the table. He doesn't complain. That's not how it works here. Instead, he hums softly, a song you don't recognize. Maybe something his mother sang to him once upon a bedtime. Across town, another world stirs a velvet-lined, smoky one that smells like perfume, oranges, and forgotten dreams. It's a music hall, not quite a theater, not quite a tavern, something in between, a place for laughter, scandal, and an astonishing amount of champagne. It's just after 5 a.m., and, believe it or not, the stagehands are still packing away props and scrubbing questionable stains off the floor. You catch sight of Clara, the hall's unofficial wardrobe mistress, and the closest thing the place has to an order keeper. She's in her 40s, sharp as a tailor's pin, and fueled entirely by sugar cubes dissolved in lukewarm tea. Her job is to collect, repair, and rehang every costume, sometimes by candlelight, sometimes with her eyes half shut. She hasn't slept properly and she laughs. I think Queen Victoria was still young when I got a full 8 hours. She's exaggerating, but not by much. Clara runs you through her to-do list: sew new fringe onto a can skirt, bleach the collar stains out of a newsboy's coat, repair the buttons ripped off by a drunken patron with grabby hands. All by morning. When the dressmaker comes to inspect the goods, you ask her when she rests, and she points to a worn velvet couch behind the stage curtain. 90 minutes between shifts. If I'm lucky, costumes are a big deal in this world. One torn hem can throw off an entire number, but sewing under candlelight is hard on the eyes and harder on the spine. Clara's hands cramp so often now, she ties her thimble on with strings so it won't fall when she dozes off mid-stitch. Here's a quirky tidbit for your pillow talk arsenal during the 1800s. Some costumers swore by a needle guard tea, a blend of herbs that allegedly protected the eyes from strain. Historians still argue whether it was helpful or just placebo with a pinch of chamomile. You help Clara spool thread, but your fingers feel clumsy beside hers. She works quickly, almost musically, stitching rhythm into fabric. And then, when it's all done, she leans her head back against the red velvet and closes her eyes, not quite sleeping, not quite waking, like everyone else you've met tonight. She's a performer in the great tragicomedy of Victorian exhaustion. You slip away quietly and return to the street. The sky is now brushing pink along the rooftops. Carts roll by more frequently, clattering under weight. Shops begin to groan open. You blink and realize how many lives have passed you by this single night, all tied together by sleeplessness and survival. As you pass a lamppost, the same one Martin extinguished hours ago, you notice it still smokes faintly. The lamp doesn't want to sleep either. It seems, or maybe it's just reluctant to surrender the stage to the sun. You can't help but wonder how any of them, Martin, Albert, Sam, Clara, find rest. Not just physical rest, but real, mental quiet. There are no noise machines, no blackout curtains, no weighted blankets embroidered with celestial designs, just hard beds, if they're lucky, softer straw, if they're not. Some find peace in tea, others in routine. Most just endure. Your thoughts drift to modern sleep aids apps, podcasts, white noise playlists that loop for 10 hours and realize how absurd they might seem to someone like Clara. A machine that plays ocean sounds so you can sleep. Must be nice to have time to pretend you're at the beach. She'd snort. And yet, you can't help but envy them a little. Because despite it all, the soot, the stink, the endless labor, there's something strangely peaceful about working while the world is quiet, about being part of the city's invisible orchestra, everyone asleep above, and you're tuning the strings in the dark. The streets now hum, not buzz hum, a low, groggy thrum, like the city is just starting to stretch its joints and blink into consciousness. You, meanwhile, are very much still awake, still wandering through the places most people only pass by in daylight. And just when you think the night's parade of sleepless souls is over, you notice a sign swinging gently in the morning air. Bleaching and dyeing, bespoke fabrics processed daily, not by day. There's a difference. You step closer, peering through a cracked, foggy window, and spot her shoulders hunched, arms elbow-deep in a vat of bluish-gray liquid that's swirling with steam and mystery. Meet Bessie. Bessie is a fabric bleacher, which sounds quaint until you realize it involves hauling heavy cloth, scrubbing it raw with lye or stale urine, and then laying it out to dry under oil lamps when the sun isn't cooperating, which is often... Your nose wrinkles. Yes, the ammonia smell is real, and it hits harder than expected at 6 in the morning. Her job is wet, blistering, and weirdly precise. You watch as she dunks a length of linen and pulls it through a series of rollers, pausing only to swat steam off her brow with a rag that's about 80% holes. The dyeing process. Even worse, between madder root for red, indigo for blue, and coppery salts for moss green. It's a wonder Victorian dyers didn't just pass out from sheer fume exposure. Fun fact, some of them did. Quirky tidbit. Green dye in the 1800s was often made with arsenic. Yes, the same poison found in rat traps. It was all the rage in wallpapers, too, which turned middle-class parlors into murder mystery backdrops. Historians still argue whether people truly understood how dangerous it was, or if they just enjoyed ignoring the signs like rashes, nausea, and the small issue of death. Bessie knows better. She doesn't mess with greens, too moody. She says, instead she sticks with browns and blues, safe shades for folks who can't afford much fashion to begin with. You can tell she's been up all night. Her hands are stained like they belong to a watercolorist, and she blinks slowly, like someone trying to focus through a layer of fog. I sleep in shifts, she mutters without prompting. 4 hours after supper, 2 after dawn. It adds up. You're not sure it does. But who's counting Bessie's rhythm is familiar now. Dip, roll, swat, dip, roll, swat. It's almost meditative. And yet, in the damp, acidic smell and the hush of steam, something feels distinctly unsoothing. Like you're watching someone wage war against time and fabric with nothing but stained fingers and boiling water. But sleep still dances at the edges of everything. Not the deep, restorative kind, but the frayed, almost hallucinatory state that wraps itself around exhaustion like a shawl. You felt it before, maybe on a red-eye flight or a 3A, essay panic. This is Bessie's normal. You thank her silently and slip back into the street, the hem of your coat now faintly damp from the mist that rolls through London like it owns the place. And maybe it does. The city feels like a beast now, breathing slowly as it transitions from one life to another. And there, beneath a narrow awning lined with bundles of dried herbs, You find another creature of the dawn, Miriam, the apothecary assistant. Miriam's shop is barely awake, but she is her eyes are ringed with sleep deprivation, but her hands are steady as she sorts tinctures, powders, and something that might have once been a frog. She works quietly, in the same rhythm you're now noticing across the whole night move. Pause, breathe, repeat, always just enough to stay upright. Her night shift isn't about emergency potions or midnight poisonings, although she wouldn't put it past some customers. It's more about preparation, grinding up chamomile, bottling valerian root essence, prepping those infamous sleeping drafts for the wealthy who can't seem to doze off despite feather mattresses and heavy curtains. That irony isn't lost on either of you. The rich stay up worrying about imaginary insomnia. Miriam stays up to make the potions that help them pretend it's solved. Mainstream fact time during the Victorian era. Insomnia became fashionable. Truly, doctors began diagnosing neurasthenia among upper-class patients, a kind of catch-all term for anxiety, sleeplessness, and vague ennui, naturally. It led to a booming market in tonics, teas, and miracle elixirs, most of which contained alcohol, opium, or both. Sleep-inducing. Sure, health-enhancing, not so much. Miriam rolls her eyes at the newest product on her shelf, Midnight Slumber Dust. It's glittery. It also smells suspiciously like crushed mints and chalk. She's not convinced it does anything, but it sells. And in a city where most people can't afford sleep, placebo dreams are a hot commodity. You help her label a few bottles, noting the tiny curls of her handwriting, each loop neat despite her shaking hands. You get used to it, she says, meaning the exhaustion. Eventually, you don't even notice the hours. But you do. Because outside, the sun is truly up now. Not the sleepy suggestion of light from before, but real, uncompromising morning. Carts clatter louder. Footsteps multiply. Conversations rise in little puffs of activity. The city is awake. It has no memory of the night, except for you and Miriam, and Clara, and Bessie, and Sam, and all the others who didn't sleep because someone had to prepare the world for the ones who did. You wonder if anyone ever thanks them. Probably not. Gratitude's not really baked into the Victorian economy, but there's something noble in their rhythm. You think, a quiet defiance of the idea that sleep is for the privileged. These people claim rest where they can, on benches, between shifts, under counters, behind curtains, wherever sleep fits. And in some strange, backwards way, they're more attuned to sleep than anyone else. Because when you chase something constantly, it becomes precious, sacred, even if you can only hold it for 10 minutes at a time. You step back into the sunlight, blinking against the glare. The night is over, but the story still wide awake. You've left the mist and the heavy scent of bleach behind and are now wandering into a quieter corner of the city, one that doesn't bustle with factories or street vendors but hums with the quiet activity of a different kind of night worker. Here, the lamps flicker dimly over stacks of leather-bound books, and the smell of ink and old paper lingers in the cool morning air. You're at the doorstep of the city's night scribes, the midnight clerks who toil while most of London dreams. Among them is Henry, a scrivener who spends his nights copying legal documents, letters, and ledgers. He's a man of steady hands and tired eyes, his fingers stained faintly with ink and his collar askew from hours bent over his desk. You watch as he dips his quill into the inkwell, then scratches the feather gently across a parchment. Each word a slow, deliberate stitch in the fabric of Victorian commerce. Henry's work is quiet, solitary, and filled with ritual. The soft scratch of pen on paper is the soundtrack of his long vigil. His clients pay well, needing documents ready by dawn, and he has little choice but to work through the hours when others sleep. I keep odd hours, he says with a thin smile, because the day belongs to others and I'm better company to myself in the dark. Here's your mainstream fact: night clerks and scribes were common in Victorian cities. filling a vital role in business and administration when deadlines loomed and the daytime office was locked up. They were essential cogs in a society rapidly expanding its bureaucratic machinery. But the quirky bit: some scribes were rumored to be secret poets or political radicals, slipping subversive verses or scandalous commentary into otherwise bland documents. Historians still argue whether these midnight musings were widespread or merely the stuff of urban legend and gossip. Henry admits that the solitude sometimes makes his mind wander towards poetry, political pamphlets, or strange daydreams. He tells you about a secret code he developed with a friend, using minute ink blots and subtle letter flourishes to communicate messages invisible to the untrained eye. Not quite espionage, he jokes, more like a game. As the hours stretch, Henry pauses, stretching cramped fingers and taking a sip from a chipped mug of tea. The room smells of ink, old wood, and something faintly smoky, perhaps a forgotten candle still smoldering from before midnight. You notice how his eyes reflect the flickering lamplight, tired yet alert. It's the paradox of night work. Your body begs for sleep, but your mind clings to the quiet rhythm of your task. Henry describes the strange halfway state between waking and dreaming he experiences in these hours, where words sometimes seem to write themselves, and reality bends just enough to feel magical. This borderline consciousness echoes what you've heard from others: Bessie's sleep shifts, Miriam's tonic preparations. It's a shared secret of those who live when the city sleeps, the boundary between night and day. Dream and wakefulness is blurry and shifting. Henry's workday will end as the dawn breaks, the city's workers flooding back into the streets, unaware of the quiet craftsmanship that preceded their bustle. You thank him for his stories and watch as he packs his quill and papers, his eyes already heavy with the promise of a stolen nap before the next night's vigil. Outside, the morning crowd thickens, and the city awakens in earnest. But you carry the quiet scratches of ink and whispered poetry with you, a reminder that some nights never truly end and that in their shadows, the pulse of the city keeps beating strong. As the dawn light softens the edges of the city, you find yourself drawn towards a different kind of night labor, one that fills the air not with ink and paper but with the scent of soot and the clink of tools. The chimneys loom overhead, dark and narrow, silent witnesses to the secret work of the Victorian chimney sweeps, who slipped through London's shadows by night to clear the soot that smothered homes by day. You meet Thomas, a young sweep with soot-smudged cheeks and a weary smile, who confesses that by day he climbs narrow chimneys and scrapes out the grime, but by night he has a secret second job delivering messages for local businesses and households. The city's fog and dim gaslights provide perfect cover for these whispered errands, and Thomas enjoys the thrill of anonymity as he slips unseen through back alleys and servant quarters. The mainstream fact here is that chimney sweeps were indeed essential to Victorian urban life, tasked with keeping homes safe from the ever-present risk of chimney fires. Their work was grueling and hazardous, often beginning in childhood, and the soot they brushed off was a byproduct of the city's dependence on coal heating. But the quirky bit: some sweeps doubled as clandestine couriers or spies, using their unique access to rooftops and chimneys to eavesdrop or pass secret messages. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was. Were these night jobs common survival strategies or romanticized myths born from gossip? Thomas shares a story about narrowly avoiding a confrontation with a suspicious landlord while delivering a sealed envelope tucked inside his soot-blackened coat. He chuckles about the absurdity of a chimney sweep acting as a messenger for genteel society, a secret life hidden beneath the grime. You imagine the paradox: a boy covered in soot, slipping unseen through the upper stories of London's wealthier homes, trusted with secrets not meant for daylight. It's a world apart from the scribes' quiet desks, yet equally vital to the city's unseen workings. Thomas's night errands keep him alert through long hours, and he swears by the strong black tea he drinks before setting out. He admits the work is lonely and exhausting, but also gives him a sense of purpose beyond the daily climb. As morning approaches, Thomas dusts off his coat and prepares for another day scraping chimneys, the soot a permanent mark on his skin and identity. You thank him and watch him disappear into the awakening city, a shadow among shadows, carrying the hidden stories of Victorian nights. The city now buzzes with daytime clamor, but the memory of Thomas and his secret errands lingers, a reminder that even in the darkest, most overlooked corners, life pulses with unexpected rhythms and quiet resilience. Now that your shoes are dusted with soot and your brain slightly fogged with coal smoke, you drift on toward the quieter edges of town, where another overlooked group of nocturnal laborers keeps the Victorian city functioning while everyone else dreams of marmalade and punctual trains. Here, in this back lot near a tannery, the scent of ammonia curls around your nose. You cough, politely. Welcome to the world of night soil men. That's right. You've found the people who cleaned up quite literally after the rest of the city. Long before indoor plumbing graced the average London home, these workers trudged from house to house under cover of night, emptying cesspits and collecting human waste in barrels. You blink hard, unsure if this is the kind of bedtime detail that makes you relax or recoil. Still, there's something oddly soothing about how methodical they are. They wear thick aprons, tie scarves around their faces, and move with practiced silence. The work might be unpleasant, but it's indispensable, and the night protects them from both heat and the social shame that follows their profession like a persistent smell. The mainstream historical fact is that night soil removal was a regulated, essential part of sanitation in 19th century cities. Without these crews, the streets and basements of London would have overflowed with filth, and sometimes did, like during the infamous Great Stink of 1858. But let's not dwell on that too long. You're trying to wind down, not pass out, the quirky fringe detail. Some night soil men were local celebrities, trusted informants to the police, or beloved fixtures in their neighborhoods. And despite the smell, they were paid relatively well. Historians still argue whether this higher pay was out of respect for the danger of disease or just an unspoken bribe to keep them from unionizing and refusing to show up during cholera season. You walk alongside one such man, Walter, who hums softly while steering his cart. He has kind eyes and the kind of easygoing attitude that says, "Yes, I know exactly what's in this barrel, and no, I'm not traumatized." He offers you a small peppermint, which, given the situation, feels like a deeply symbolic peace offering. Walter explains that his route takes him past certain homes that tip extra if he doesn't clang the lids or talk to the neighbors. He chuckles at the memory of a woman who once tried to disguise her waste barrel as a flower pot. "Nice geraniums." He grins, eyes twinkling, "But I still had to dump it." You realize that Walter's nighttime routine is strangely intimate. He knows who eats what, who's sick, who has unexpected guests, all from the barrel. He could write a novel, but instead he shrugs and says, "Better to forget what you see or smell." As the night deepens and a thin mist rises, Walter finishes his shift and wheels his load to a dumping site beyond the edge of town. You follow at a distance, marveling that even the city's dirtiest secrets rely on someone quietly, efficiently handling them by moonlight. And then, just as the air begins to clear and the stars peek out between clouds, you leave Walter and his humming cart behind. The memory of him might linger longer than the smell. You barely have time to adjust to the fresh air when you hear the faint clink of metal and the soft shuffle of hurried feet. You duck into the shadows and peer out at a figure in a ragged coat with a lantern hooked to his belt. He carries something over his shoulder that doesn't quite match the usual night shift toolkit. It's long, oddly shaped, and wrapped in canvas. You've stumbled into the haunting, uncomfortable world of Victorian body snatchers, also known as resurrectionists. Don't worry, you're not the body. But statistically speaking, someone in your ancestral line may have been on the receiving end of this moonlit retrieval service. See, medical schools in the 1800s were desperate for cadavers, and the law only allowed them to use executed criminals, which quickly proved to be not nearly enough to meet the high demand of dissecting student hands. So, a thriving underground economy sprang up, and it thrived in the dark. The mainstream fact body snatching was technically legal for a while. Grave robbing was frowned upon, but only became a real criminal offense if clothing or jewelry was stolen. The body itself, not legally owned by anyone. That legal loophole led to many quiet nights of digging, dragging, and bribing cemetery staff to look the other way. Now here's the quirky twist. Some resurrectionists ran like family businesses. There were even professional-grade tools, collapsible shovels, silk ropes, and canvas bags designed to keep things tidy. One infamous team in Manchester reportedly stole so many bodies they began offering bulk rates to nearby hospitals. You can't help but picture a grim 19th century punch card, 9 cadavers, and the 10th one's free historians still argue whether the general public's outrage was truly about morality or more about the unsettling idea of disturbed graves. After all, once a loved one was buried, people expected eternal rest. Not a second act on a dissection table under the flickering gas lamps of a surgical theater. The man you're following, let's call him Edgar, moves with purpose. He's done this before. Tonight's job is a modest affair, a newly buried gentleman. No coffin plate, no mourning family likely to return before Sunday. Edgar's partner is already at the site, loosening soil with steady hands. Their movements are efficient, almost elegant in their synchronization. You don't know whether to be impressed or horrified. So you settle into that cozy middle ground where most Victorian tales tend to land. As the grave is opened and the canvas bundle laid into a wheelbarrow padded with straw, you notice a curious item tucked in Edgar's coat pocket, a peppermint. What is it with these Victorian night workers and their love of mint on the journey back? Edgar whistles off-key, but not unpleasantly. You overhear a muttered remark about avoiding Bishopsgate because of new patrols and wonder if he and Walter the night soil man ever crossed paths. Waving across alleys with a shared nod of nocturnal understanding, the corpse, freshly liberated from its eternal nap, is delivered to the back entrance of a teaching hospital. The porter hands Edgar a coin pouch without a word, and the body is quietly wheeled away through a service door. In this city, even the dead are just another item on the night's to-do list. As you trail Edgar back into the night, you realize he's no villain in his own eyes, just a man paid to fill a need. The ethics of that trade will swirl in your head for a bit, like the fog now curling around your boots. The city exhales. A bell tower chimes 4 times, slow and hollow. Time to keep moving after all. The night is far from over, and the Victorians have a few more secrets to show you before dawn. You barely finish rounding the next lamplit corner when the glow of another window catches your eye, this one spilling soft golden light onto the cobblestones. Not harsh like the factory wards or flickering like the taverns. It pulses gently like a heartbeat and draws you in. Inside, women hunch over embroidery frames, their fingers dancing like spiders through fabric. It's well past midnight, and they're still stitching by candlelight. Welcome to the world of Victorian needlework where sleep, like decent wages, is optional. You step inside the cramped workshop, ducking instinctively beneath beams hung with drying silks and patterns inked in pencil. These women aren't simply hobbyists. They're part of a cottage industry that fed the insatiable Victorian craving for ornament altar cloths, mourning veils, christening gowns, and absurdly detailed samplers no one ever really read. And unlike the loud clang of looms in a mill, embroidery was quiet, conveniently out of sight for middle-class customers who preferred not to imagine their lace doilies were hand-stitched by a 13-year-old named Maud who hasn't slept more than 4 hours in 3 days. Here's your mainstream historical fact: embroidery, millinery, and other needle-based trades employed thousands of Victorian women and girls, especially those without family or fortune. It was one of the few forms of labor deemed respectable, provided you kept your workspace tidy and your coughing discreet. One girl rubs her eyes with the back of her knuckle and bites a thread loose with her teeth. Her name is Florence. She's 17 and she's racing to finish a church banner before Sunday. You peek over her shoulder. It's a crimson cross, outlined in gold, with the words, "Let no man boast of rest," curling beneath it in thread that glimmers like polished brass. Quirky tidbit. Some embroidery patterns were made to be worked in near darkness. Designs printed in wax or faint blue ink would only emerge under candlelight, so you had to squint just right to see them. Victorian sewing rooms were a bit like magic eye puzzles crossed with workplace hazard zones. Florence sighs, cracks her knuckles, and resumes the same 3 stitches she's been repeating since dusk. Around her, others breathe in rhythm deep, resigned, quiet. A few girls sleep sitting up, their necks at unnatural angles, hands still curled around needles. You try not to trip over the spools of thread scattered across the floor, but you probably step on at least one thimble. It's fine. No one notices. Historians still argue whether these long night shifts were forced by demand or self-imposed by desperation. Some letters and memoirs describe managers who locked workers inside until quotas were met. Others hint that girls pushed themselves to exhaustion because one missed order meant a missed meal. You back out, blinking into the fog again, your fingers tingling in sympathy. There's a myth that all Victorian women were tucked safely in drawing rooms sipping tea, but if you listened closely at night, you'd hear the soft snick of scissors and the rustle of thread from tenement windows and church basements across London. The air grows cooler, and you wrap your coat tighter. A strange rhythm catches your attention. Next click, drag, click, drag. You follow the sound past a bakery shuttered for the night, past a coal chute still warm, until you find the source, an old man pushing a cart. But this isn't a vendor or tinker. He's hauling chairs. To be more precise, rent-by-the-hour sleeping chairs. You've stumbled upon one of Victorian London's stranger inventions for the chronically tired poor. Imagine this, you're too broke for a room in a doss house, but too exhausted to keep walking. For a few pence, you can sit in a dark shed full of strangers, elbows touching, and sleep while tied to a rope strung across your chest to stop you from falling forward. No beds, just chairs and ropes and blessed stillness for a few hours. Luxury. Really, if you don't mind the snoring, the coughing, or the smell of 30 unwashed coats marinating together overnight. The cartman parks and knocks on a side door. A gruff face opens it, nods, and counts the chairs. Business is booming. You're tempted to try one yourself, just to see what kind of dreams they produce. The city was not built for sleep, you realize, not for everyone. For some, sleep was stolen in scraps, between shifts or after chores, in corners and on ropes, fingers still aching from the day's work. It was not the luxury we now imagine. Wrapped in duvets and blackout curtains, it was a gamble, a calculation, a whispered hope that no one would wake you too soon. A church bell groans 5 times. Morning is threatening, but the night isn't quite ready to let go. A cat slinks past you, tail high, clearly better rested than half the humans on this street. You watch it vanish beneath a dray cart, and you can't help but wonder, does the cat know where to find the softest hay bale? Does it dream of thread and peppermint? Like the others, you turn your collar up and keep walking. There's still one more stop before dawn. The mist clings to your boots now, dampening the edges of your steps as you make your way further east past gas lamps hissing low with the last of their fuel, past slumbering shops with half-painted signs and crates frozen mid-unload. You know what's waiting ahead, the city's final refuge for its most invisible workers. The place where the night outlives itself. The newspaper depot. It's not a place people usually think of when imagining Victorian night labor, but this is where the early morning papers begin their long journey across London, and where sleep ends before it even starts for the boys and girls who sell them. The clatter hits you first, wooden wheels, inked bundles, shouted names. You watch a small army of children, most under 12, darting through alleys and across slick stones, grabbing stacks of print and disappearing like rats into the fog. They wear oversized coats and mismatched boots, some dragging wagons, others just clutching a dozen copies under their arms. No gloves, no parents, just ink-stained hands and urgent footsteps. You crouch behind a milk cart to stay out of the way. Nearby, a boy with hair like straw and a front tooth missing from last week's scuffle shouts the headlines to no one in particular. Parliament suspends gas tax tragedy on the River Thames. He doesn't even glance at the words. He's memorized the rhythm. All that matters is getting attention and moving product before the sun fully rises. Your mainstream historical fact for tonight: by the 1870s, newsboys and occasionally newsgirls formed a crucial link in the growing machine of British mass media. Without them, the Times, the Telegraph, and the cheaper penny dailies wouldn't reach the hands of dock workers, shopkeepers, and sleepy commuters before breakfast. And for these kids, it was a race. A single unsold stack meant docked pay. The competition was ruthless. If you were lucky, you staked out a corner by 4:30 a.m. If you were unlucky, well, you could always try again tomorrow. Assuming your cough didn't get worse, here's a quirky tidbit: some enterprising newsboys developed their own coded hand signals to communicate across crowded streets, tipping each other off to constables, bad customers, or fresh batches of penny sheets. A flicked elbow might mean go east, while a tucked chin could warn. That gentleman already bought. The papers, mind you, weren't always reliable. Half the time, the kids invented headlines just to move copies faster. Queen's dog joins army probably never happened, but it sold 15 extra sheets on a foggy Tuesday. Ethics took a nap. Survival stayed wide awake. One boy, red-faced and out of breath, skids to a halt beside you. He drops his bundle, offers you a suspicious squint, then shoves a paper at your chest with a grunt. You reach for your pocket, but he's already gone chasing a potential buyer shouting across the street. Historians still argue whether news hawking was a stepping stone or a trap. Some children rose from it, became printers, editors, even politicians. Others stayed frozen in that liminal zone between night and dawn, forever tired, forever hoarse. You wander into a coffee stall tucked beneath a railway arch. The owner is ladling thick black liquid into chipped mugs, barely noticing the parade of half-asleep kids who stagger past for warmth. You sip, but the bitterness shocks you awake more than you'd like. It's more tar than coffee, really, but when your body's forgotten what rest feels like, anything hot will do. A girl named Molly stands nearby, counting her remaining sheets. She's 11, and her sleeves are rolled high to avoid ink stains, though her cheeks are already smudged. You ask if she minds the hours. She shrugs, says she likes the quiet before the bankers flood the streets. She hasn't slept since Tuesday night. That was 3 papers ago. You want to argue, tell her to go home, sleep, be a child. But where exactly would she go? The Doss houses won't open again until nightfall, and Molly's already behind on her rent rope fees. A sudden wind picks up. Papers flutter across the cobblestones like startled pigeons. Molly curses quietly, expertly, and bolts after them. You watch her silhouette vanish down a side street, head low, boots loud, posture defiant. She's going to make it or not, but she's certainly not giving up this shift. And there you stand, in a city buzzing just beneath its surface. The world may think it sleeps. The bankers will rise at 7 and assume London simply waited for them. The fog will lift and the chimneys will smoke, and the carriages will clatter to office doors as if nothing had happened. But you know the truth. You've seen the stitched fingers, the scorched lungs, the boys and girls sprinting into daylight on 0 hours of rest and fewer crumbs of comfort. Sleep is a luxury, hoarded by the rich, borrowed briefly by the desperate, and the night belongs to workers like Molly. You step out of the coffee arch and feel the first light sting your eyes. Just a thread of dawn, but enough to begin dissolving the shadows. The lamplighter from hours ago is back, dimming each flame with a practiced flick. He looks at you, nods once, then moves on. You follow slowly, letting your feet drag. There's one final route to take before the story ends, and one more layer to the sad history of sleep. The city starts blinking awake around you, not all at once, but in soft layers like someone slowly peeling gauze from their eyes. A shutter creaks open. A dog stretches in an alley. Somewhere, a bakery stirs to life with a puff of flour and the clang of a pan. You should be asleep. Everyone should. But here you are, chasing the last of the night to its hiding place. And that hiding place, oddly enough, is inside the bodies of the people who try to survive without sleep at all. You pass a narrow building with peeling white paint and no sign above the door, just a brass bell and a small line of women leaning into the fog, eyes hollow and coats damp. This is a laundry, but not the kind you send trousers to for a press and fold. This is a workhouse laundry, and it's where the morning shift begins for women who've slept barely a breath. You join the line not in body, but in spirit, and follow the women inside. The heat slams into you first. It's almost a kindness, except that the air is thick with steam and soap, and the dizzying sting of lye. A woman to your left blinks rapidly to stop the tears the ammonia's coaxing from her eyes. Another is already wringing towels into a wooden vat with a squeaky crank, her knuckles raw and nails split. These aren't women who overslept. They're women who didn't sleep at all. They arrive here straight from the doss house floors or the markets, or even from street corners where they stood all night selling matches, ribbons, or nothing at all. One woman, maybe 50 but worn enough to pass for 70, sways at her station as she beats linen against a stone slab. You realize she's asleep standing up, arms still moving from memory. This is where the last part of the story unfolds, not in grand factories or soot-choked chimneys, but in the quiet slavery of expectation. The expectation that sleep is a weakness, a luxury, an indulgence for those with time. These women have no time, only shifts and blisters. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Victorian-era laundries, especially the institutional ones tied to workhouses or penitentiaries, operated on a grueling schedule that often began before dawn and continued into the night. The tasks weren't automated. It was all handwork, stirring, boiling, wringing, pressing, folding, all done with stiff brushes and harsh chemicals, many of which burned the skin and lungs over time. A quirky fact buried in the steam, some women sang rhythmic songs to keep from falling asleep mid-wash. The beat kept their arms moving, and their minds barely alert. Scholars later recorded some of these laundry tunes, many of which involved ironic verses about noble ladies who didn't know how to darn a sock or touch a washboard. Think of it as the Victorian version of venting in the break room, except your break was scrubbing someone else's bloomers. Historians still argue whether these labor cycles destroyed more bodies than the factories themselves. The factories had laws eventually, but laundries, domestic work, street peddling, those were gray zones, invisible to policymakers, quietly sanctioned by a society that assumed women's exhaustion was just a natural state. You step around a mound of steam-damp linens and into a back alcove, where the ironing girls work. Flat irons, heated on open flames, must be timed just right. Too hot, and the cloth scorches. Too cool, and you're wasting time. You watch a girl not older than 14 test the heat with a flick of spit on the iron's base. It sizzles. She nods, begins pressing collars without missing a beat. She hasn't spoken since you arrived. Not because she's unfriendly, but because she has to ration her breath. The steam room isn't kind to lungs already frayed by soot and hunger. You wonder what dreams she has, if any, or whether she's traded them all for one more slice of bread at the end of her shift. And that's when it hits you. The secret of Victorian night work isn't just that it happened. It's that it was hidden in plain sight, in laundries, in streets, in stables and kitchens and beds never slept in. Sleep was sold, bartered, deferred like rent. Workers like her made up the quiet skeleton of empire holding it all up, even as they sagged. As the laundry bell rings and the doors creak open to receive the next shift, you step outside. The air is still cool, but it feels lighter now. The fog is lifting in earnest. You stand on the edge of daylight with a sense that something enormous just passed through you like a train of ghosts, each with a mop, a matchbox, or a sack of newspapers slung over their back. You remember the girl from the laundry, the newsboy with the missing tooth, the sweep with soot on his gums. They didn't get sleep. They got history, not the kind written down, the kind lived in the dark, in shifts, in silence. It's almost too much to carry, so As your boots crunch over loose stones and the street brightens by degrees, you let it go just a little. You breathe. You step. You blink. And the night lets you go.